Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubbs the Club, your University of Idaho affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, and we've got a change up. First, we're going to go to always producing, always seducing, holding it down in Moscow, Martin Heemstra. Martin, how's it going, dude?
It's going good. It's nice to be back after a couple weeks off due to some work stuff, but it's nice to be back on and be on, just listen and talk about Idaho Vandal athletics again.
I believe you. And the reason I believe you is, look, like I said, we got to change up. Dallas Hammer is currently in dereliction of duty doing something. I can't tell you what. I know he told me, but I don't know what he told me. And we've got a new co-host, and this is got to confirm. Hey, James Aldrich, University of Idaho student, our first University of Idaho student co-host on the show, just got to confirm, because Martin, like we said, Martin's producing and seducing. You are legal in the state of Idaho, correct?
Legal in the state of Idaho in what way?
Like you've turned 18?
Yes.
Okay, so
I am indeed 18.
Okay, are you newly legal, or is this old news?
This is old news. I am the age of 20. I turned 21 in November of this year.
Okay, so easily legal, soon to be he'll be celebrating his 21 run during the next football season. James Aldrich, glad to have you on the show. I know you work for the Argonaut, but can you tell everyone a quick background on your position? Because I know I should have researched this, but I clearly just outed myself as failing on that front.
No, it's totally understandable. I'm going to pretend that I know what I'm doing here as well. So I work as the sports editor at the Argonaut, as well as DJ over at KUOI, and also have revamped the Vandal scoreboard for QE as well.
I knew I should have brought that up. The infrequently uploaded Vandal scoreboard, which is actually a pretty cool podcast, you guys. Other than Tubbs the Club, I think Vandal scoreboard is that's like the only other Vandal podcast I found. That was you guys' interview with Jason Eck was foundational research for our last week's spring preview. And full disclosure, man, we post our links on All Vandals as well, which, that's a message board a lot of alums use. And had about 4 or 5 people ask for the URL. So of course I posted it. Don't know if you've checked the downloads, but you should have had at least 5 extra downloads if my research is correct. But
so cool.
Okay, we're gonna jump into Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition, guys. It's a bit of a this is, you might call it like a house cleaning episode, that we have about 4 or 5 small topics to go through. But the very first one is news. It is University of Idaho football related, not spring football news related. Look, we talked last week about enjoying the coaching staff while it's here, and that we were honestly shocked that as many of Idaho football's coaches came back from last year. Well, it looks like Idaho lost their first staff member from last season. Safeties coach Tyler Yelk, according to Football Scoop, is going to be joining the Philadelphia Eagles as assistant to head coach for Nick Sirianni. That's Philadelphia Eagles head coach. So Tyler Yelk came over to University of Idaho from Temple prior. So there's the Philadelphia connection. We're going to say that Tyler Yelk is co-signing the Football Scoop news because he liked the tweets that I and Tubbs the Club sent out saying, hey, we're glad we had Tyler Yelk while we did. So that's our first coach who's going to be changing over. James, quick reaction to hearing Tyler Yelk's going to be moving up to the NFL after, Vandal secondary was surprisingly good last year, which, the secondary coaches were Tyler Yelk, Stanley Franks. Stanley Franks is still here. But reaction to hearing that Tyler Yelk is moving on to very, very much greener pastures.
Yeah, it was really surprising to me. Mark and I went over this earlier today. I didn't expect an Idaho coach to leave this early, but huge congratulations to Coach Yelk. Definitely a big loss, but big things for him, big things for Idaho football to see a coach go to the NFL.
Yeah, and we know that look, at the FCS level, especially the assistant coaches, look, those positions turn over. Look at Eastern Washington through their run heading into last season, and the volume of offensive coordinators who moved elsewhere. Look at Montana State, which has been churning through coordinators as well under Jeff Choate, and then now Brent Vegan. That's, of course, not bad news. Tyler Yelk moving up to the NFL. Look, my big takeaway here is it's obviously great news for Tyler Yelk and his family. It's also good, I think, for the Vandal program that when we have a coach leave, they're moving on to a job where you completely understand why the dude took that step. So I don't have much else to add other than, look, we're going to see there may be some reshuffling of coaching roles in addition to a new coach coming. The University of Idaho is actually advertising for recruiting coordinator right now on their website, but there's no news about Tyler Sutton leaving. So, hey, there's a chance that maybe just a couple roles reshuffle. University of Montana, that was the only real change they did in this last offseason, was changing coaches' roles. That absolutely happens elsewhere. So congrats, Tyler Yelk. Fingers crossed that next season goes well for Philadelphia. And now, James, I'm going to pivot to spring football, because that's what, look, we've got 26 live listeners at this moment. Most people right here are in for spring football news. You've been to a couple of the practices, or you've at least been to portions of a couple of practices. There's only been 2 as of recording on March 30th, 2023. The next practice is going to be Saturday. But look, last week, for anyone who missed it, we covered that spring football isn't this year. It's not about like, hey, who's the starting quarterback? We know that's Giovanni McCoy. We're not finding out who the top running back is. That's Anthony Woods. We're not finding out who the top receivers are. Those are Hayden Hatton and Jermaine Jackson. Some of the big sexy positions we know what Idaho has. But the big, there's a few areas that if Idaho's going to move from being a pretty good team, they're a fun team last year, but you call them pretty good, not great last season. If Idaho's going to make that step up, like Jason Eck talked about on you guys' show, groups like the O-line, the D-line, they're going to have to get better. Secondary, though it was improved, is going to have to get better. You've been to practice, man. I'm going to give you the wheel. Tell me what group so far has kind of stood out the most for one reason or another.
I would definitely say the secondary has been huge. Mervyn Kenyon, we got him last year. He had a great season. Continues to play great at practice. Almost had an interception today. I think I've got that correct. Against Giovanni McCoy. Jackson Eck really showed out on Tuesday. Has been getting a lot of reps there in the defense. Just very, very impressed with how this defense is gelling together. We said not really wide receivers, but the tight end room is going to be very competitive, I believe. But if I'm Idaho at this point, from what I'm seeing, I do a lot of 4 wide with number 85 Michael Graves and number 89 Tommy Hauser has been playing very well in these last 2 practices. Had some huge catches today. Definitely. Going to be a battle at tight end, but from what I've seen, the defense is gelling together. The O-line is looking good, and I'm really excited to see what they pull out Saturday.
So you hit a few of the groups, so I'm gonna just slow you down and ask you a few questions about each one. So tight end, that's essentially a blank slate. There's about 3 returning catches so far. We know Alex Moore hurt his knee against Washington State, just based off the timeline, even though a lot's happened since the Washington State game back in September. Relative to rehabbing a knee injury, that's only 6 months. So we know that for Alex Moore to be, ready to play, average knee injury is going to take longer than 6 months. So we know Alex Moore is probably not going to be a guy that we see a ton of in the spring, practicing. But if 6 months ago is when the knee injury took place, we know he was a guy who's a darling of last spring. We're probably not going to see much of Alex until the actual season. But in the time you've been there, of the very blank slate tight end group we're looking at right now, has anyone stood out as a pass catcher?
Not really. It's mostly been wide receivers, but like I said, but definitely on Saturday, I'll be looking out for those tight end positions to see who really stands out when I can actually be at a full practice.
Okay. So we're going to understand that, hey, reporting right now from tight ends is that there's still no clarity. And look, we're 2 practices in, and there's like a total of 3 returning catches from tight end. So that looks like room they'll probably take a little bit longer. Also, the potential pass catchers in the tight end room are younger guys or guys like Alex Moore, who needs to get fully healthy for us to see where he's going to be. So I want to shift to. It's hard to not to talk about the O line without talking about the D line itself. But from what you've been able to see at practice so far, relative to the offensive line, it's good. That's a really young group. We've got, I think, one total senior on the roster. There's a ton of freshmen, ton of sophomores. How has the offensive line been looking as far as pass protection or in things like one-on-ones?
It's been looking good. Giovanni, Jack Lane have both been taking quite a few snaps, and both have had plenty of time to get it out with minimal pressure. I would definitely expect some probably shifting around there to really get it set. But at this moment, 2 practices in, really not a whole lot of pressure being put on the QB, but have definitely been able to get those reads. It's mostly been the secondary on defense that has really been putting in the work.
Okay, we'll hit the secondary in a second, but just I want to paraphrase what you said. You tell me if I'm understanding correctly. So you of course were on campus last year, and you were familiar last year in Camp 1 that like the reporting out of spring football was that the offense was taking a lot longer to gel, which makes sense because it's new. A lot of guys have been there for at least a year, of course, or a year with Jason X, so that learning curve isn't going to exist this spring. But you're saying the offensive line right now, look, if you were concerned, based off what you can report, the quarterbacks are getting time to get their passes off. So relatively speaking, it's at least looking like developmentally it's moving in the right direction.
For sure. This team, as you said, they're young, but I expect by the end of spring practice that there will be a solid offensive line there.
Okay. Now shifting to the other side, defensive line, where there's one total returning starter on the defensive line. So we know there's going to be some new names and new faces for Vandals to get accustomed to. What or who's been standing out from defensive line so far?
That's a great question. I haven't really had a chance to, stare down the numbers on the line. It's mostly been kind of those corners, fullbacks, or corner linebackers, safeties. The defensive line has, it's there, but not really anything that's been, big pressure wise that I've really seen in the last couple of days.
Okay. So is it safe to say then, the question is O-line, D-line, of course, for one to look good, the other might not look as great. That was the thing last season that was hard to disentangle last season, was the D-line looking great in the spring because the O-line wasn't gelling, or were they just good? You're saying, hey, there's not enough evidence right now to say either way, like, hey, is the D-line looking great or not? Like, they look in the same way you said the O-line's looking okay, the D-line's probably looking okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. I want to give the wheel back to you. And now you said the secondary is where things have stood out a little bit more defensively. Could you just take that wherever you want to, direction wise? What are you seeing that leads you to say the secondary looks like it's making some strides, or the secondary is an area where, other than Marcus Harris, other than guys like Tommy McCormick, there are questions about who fills out the rest of the roster, questions about who the number 2 cornerback is going to be. What are you seeing that's making you feel good about what you've seen out of the secondary?
Yeah, I think Mervin Kenyon is one of the best defensive players that I've seen in the first 2 practices. He is all over the ball. He's playing well in coverage. The big thing is Idaho's been practicing a lot of those shorter passes because those deep balls have been covered. The first time I saw really an open deep ball was Jermaine Jackson about 15 yards down the field today. And that pass wasn't hit. So, as you said, mentioned Tommy McCormick, who is obviously, showing up. Matthias Bertram and Ben Bertram both are really showing up there.
Pause real quick, just for listeners, if you're not familiar with those names, Matthias Bertram, he plays safety. Ben Bertram's on the D line.
Yes. So they're both great players. Matthias, obviously, probably the more well-known name at this point. He played very well last season when needed, and has shown up. Was named the defensive player of the day for that first practice with an interception. So really Mervin Kenyon, Matthias Bertram, even Jackson Eck has been getting quite a few reps, as I mentioned. I would say if Coach Eck decides to put his son in and Jackson doesn't redshirt, I think we could see a lot of Jackson, Swerve and Mervin Kenyon, as they call him, and Matthias Bertram.
Okay. Want to ask you about Jackson Eck, and then we can pivot to linebackers there for a moment, because linebacker room is changing. Paul Moala has been moved to inside linebacker, which is where Favai played last season, which means, of course, there's an opening where Paul Moala was. But before we hit other linebackers, you brought up Jackson Eck, and I mean also Trevin Pixley in the Twitter coverage he's been doing of practice. He referenced Jackson Eck looking relatively good. I mean, when you say Jackson Eck's kind of standing out a little bit, like what relative to being he's going to be a true freshman next season, in what ways do you mean he's standing out a bit?
He's just like Mervin has been, he's been on the ball. He's been where he needs to be. He's been focused, and as a true freshman coming in for spring ball after I'm guessing early graduation last or at the end of the fall after his high school football season, he looks like an experienced player out there. Definitely probably still some holes to fill, but he's focused and he knows what he's doing out there, and it's been really fun to watch him in these first two practices.
Okay, so you're saying physically he looks the part of a potential contributor?
For sure, yeah.
Okay, and then athleticism wise, you're saying he looks the part of a potential contributor?
Yeah.
Okay. Trey Thomas, South Dakota transfer, is to my knowledge, and the other people I talked to said Trey Thomas is taking all the reps with the ones right now for one of the outside linebacker slots. Have you noticed anything with either Trey Thomas or Paul Moala that you think is worth commenting on?
Not off the top of my head. I've mostly been able to watch the offense getting reps in. I had to leave pretty early this morning when they were starting to move over to more heavy defensive reps, but not really anything that pops out right now.
Okay. So then if offense is the other area where it's easier, there's probably some more observations for you to go. I'm going to give you the wheel again. We're talking offense. Look, we got 30 live listeners, man. Everyone is just there. Everyone wants to hear how practice is looking. Take the wheel. What have you been noticing on the offensive end?
It's been a little weird to me to see a lot of out routes and a lot of short passes. We saw a lot of Hayden Hatton and Jermaine Jackson going deep, whereas, the deepest balls that have been thrown have been 15, 20 yards, and that's without defenders. So I would say that, Giovanni McCoy, we saw he's got an arm on him, and, practicing these shorter routes is definitely good. I would expect to see maybe some more deep passes later on during practice, but it has been a lot of short passes, which has been slightly frustrating because I want to see cool stuff happening in practice. And these 2-3 yard, maybe 5-6 yard checkdowns have really been the big thing when the defense is out there. So I don't know if maybe Idaho's trying to get more of those short passes in compared to what they did last season, or what the plan is there, but also very minimal run game at practice. I haven't seen Woods with the ball taking it in the backfield yet. He's only been utilized on a few passes that I've seen. So,
okay. Well, hey, look, that would be a developmental step for Idaho's offense relative to last season. Because look, my recollection, James, tell me if yours is different, and this isn't a complaint. McCoy didn't throw a ton of passes that traveled less than 10 yards through the air.
No, I completely agree.
And I don't know how much that was simplifying the offense, because you got a redshirt freshman taking over and the team was solid. So there was potential that needed to be maximized. I don't know how much that was just based off the personnel, whatever short passes, getting guys into space you might have thought Idaho would do. They just didn't feel comfortable doing that. But look, either way, an extra facet of the offense is an extra facet of the offense. And we know because of last season to not get too touchy about any sort of spring football takeaways offensively, because the offensive stuff takes a little bit longer to develop than the defensive stuff. Jason Eck in Vandal Football, they began doing their 2 questions, where Jarek Walcott asked Jason Eck a couple questions at the end of practice. And Jason Eck brought up a bit of a battle for the number 3 receiver between Michael Graves and Jordan Dwyer. Jordan Dwyer, who missed a lot of last season with injury. So just want to ask you about those 2 guys. You also brought up Michael Graves too. What are you seeing out of those 2 guys that are potentially in the running for that 3rd wide receiver? And I bring that up because, look, guys, Therese Trainer's been gone forever. Until we see Therese Trainer playing, I'm not really going to be that I'm not going to put that much energy into dissecting where Therese Trainer fits in. But if Jason Eck's talking about those 2 guys battling for number 3 right now, that's where the number 3 battle is. So you seen anything out of Michael Graves and Jordan Dwyer that, I don't know, piques your interest?
Yeah, at this moment, I would put Michael Graves at that 3 spot from what I've seen. The man goes up for the ball. He's lanky. He's just a good receiver from what I've seen. In the first 2 practices, from what I've been able to watch, he's getting a lot of targets, bringing down those high balls, really just going for it. You also mentioned Therese. I don't think he'd be that 3rd wide receiver, of course, but I do think if he can stay healthy, he could definitely be a weapon off the bench. He's shown up pretty good in practice so far too.
Oh, so you've seen Therese at practice. He's been doing all right.
Yeah. He had a really good sideline catch today that I was lucky enough to snag a photo of. So he's been part of those shorter routes, kind of that second offense there, 3rd offense. He's been out there and he's been doing well.
Okay, hey, that's interesting to hear. I didn't realize that Therese was right now running with the 2s.
Yeah, it's 2s or 3s. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not great at math or paying attention to who's going out at what times. But he's been getting reps in, and I'm a fan of Therese Trainer. I've been happy to see him out there.
No, dude, that's good to hear. The reason I brought up kind of dismissively was more just because he was out for essentially all of last season. Idaho did fine without Trainer because other people stepped up, which means I don't know where a healthy Therese Trainer fits in with the current makeup, because number 1 and number 2 are essentially set in stone. I mean, Jason Eck talked about on you guys' show of guys who were playing like an All-American level, like their spots essentially there, and the position battles are elsewhere. But that's interesting to hear about Therese. So good news that he's healthy. Question, because obligatory, man. If we're a show that talks about sports, we have to at least pretend there's going to be a quarterback question. We already know McCoy is going to be number 1, but look, first question, McCoy's still looking sharp, right?
Yeah. I have seen him throw 1 bad pass, and it wasn't really a bad pass. It was more good coverage. But he's been hitting exactly where he was last season. So no worries there at all.
Okay. I just had to go to the comments really quick. Racket 69 said agree, Brian. And for the record, anytime someone says agree, Brian, I'm going to throw you on the screen. We'll hit the rest of the comments in a second. So that would mean, of course, look, we already know Giovanni McCoy is a starter, but it's an item of interest. It's spring football as well. How have Jack Lane and Ridge Dutchikal been looking, and what roles have you seen both of them have?
First of all, I'm glad you pronounced Ridge's last name because I didn't know how to say it.
Yeah, Dutchikal.
Dutchikal. Okay. So as we saw, Jack Lane was named the offensive player of the first practice, which really surprised me. But it makes sense. He was throwing as well as he could have as a 2nd string quarterback. So I would say he at this moment he's definitely set for that number 2 spot if knock on wood, McCoy goes down one game before the playoffs again, Idaho wouldn't have to worry that they might lose the Battle of the Domes or something. Definitely a good option, or even if McCoy needs rest, definitely a guy that can come in. Haven't seen much out of Ridge, but from what I have seen, he's also playing at a pretty decent level.
Okay, so you're saying in the roles that each quarterback's been given, they're all looking pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other offensive observations you want to give?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Hayden and Jermaine have looked like Hayden and Jermaine. That third string wide receiver spot is definitely wide open. But at this point, I would probably put Michael Graves there. And then hopefully going to learn some more about the offensive line on Saturday.
Okay. And health-wise, just because hitting back to that number 3 receiver discussion of Graves and Dwyer. Dwyer missed a lot of second half of the season. I mean, I think he's still a freshman based off games he played. How's Dwyer looked health-wise?
I haven't seen much. I'm trying to think back. Most of what I've seen has been Michael Graves and even Tommy Hauser I've seen more of, which is kind of surprising that a guy who's not really mentioned in the discussion is out there playing as many reps as I've seen him get. So I'll look more at Dwyer on Saturday and see kind of where that's looking at and put something on Twitter or something like that.
Okay, so you're saying true sophomore Tommy Hauser out of Post Falls, Idaho. You're saying maybe he's been the surprise on the offensive side of the ball for you so far?
Yeah, I didn't even know who he was. I walked over to Jarek and I was like, who the heck is that guy? Because I didn't have my roster on me at the time. And he's definitely two huge catches that I've seen so far on some good deep out routes. So
okay,
definitely tough.
Has he been playing with the ones, or is that with the 2s or the 3s?
2s and 3s, yeah.
Okay, so you're saying of the receivers who are not top 3 or 4, Hauser's been the biggest surprise?
For sure, yeah.
Okay. Are you going to be able to go Saturday?
Yeah, I'll be up there all day Saturday. At least I should be. I don't think I have anything else going on. So.
Okay. So that means we'll, of course, be assaulting you with some questions. But hey, before we pivot much from spring football, because like what you're describing so far is, look, I don't think we're at the point now with Vandal football that we need to, of course, not overreact to good news or bad news out of spring football. The ultimate good news is no one gets hurt and the team looks better at the end than they did at the beginning. We know, because we've already seen a season of progress out of Vandal football, that the team we see in the spring is not going to be the team we see in the fall. But look, the questions for me that are going to persist through the spring are O-line, D-line, and then secondary, plus just how the linebackers shake up, because I think development on the O-line and D-line really is what's going to differentiate Idaho and the top of the big sky. Kind of like, look, when Idaho looked good last season, it just wasn't against the bigger teams like, for example, UC Davis. UC Davis was comparable talent-wise to Idaho, but they were big in a way that Idaho struggled with. Sacramento State was big in a way Idaho struggled with. And, of course, playoff game as well against Southeast Louisiana. Idaho just, in my mind, wasn't yet big or quite physical enough to, beat some of the good teams. And, I keep bringing up your episode, James, where Jason Eck was on there, and Jason Eck brought that up. Last year, Idaho beat the bad teams. They beat the okay teams. But against playoff teams, they went about 1-3. They went 1-3 against playoff teams, beat Montana, then lost to Sacramento State, lost to Southeast Louisiana, and lost to, who am I drawing a blank on? Who's the other playoff?
UC Davis was the other one, but they weren't in the playoffs.
Okay, they're in the playoff mix.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like at this point, there isn't enough evidence yet to say what the O-line, D-line developments are going to be. I know Terry Rainey, he's a transfer. He was a guy Jason Eck brought up in the 2 questions as a person he thought has been making some progress. We know because we already touched on it. Linebacker room is going to look different. It's probably going to be hard to understand how different they are in spring. But Paul Moala's, we know he's good, and I know I'm confident as hell that he's the guy now at the inside slot. I'm interested to hear about Trey Thomas as well. And then look, we're going to find out later about defensive backs. But it sounds like your observations, tell me if I'm wrong, way too early to have actual takeaways on O-line, D-line. Secondary, there's some dudes who look promising. We need a couple guys to step up in the secondary to fill in holes. You referenced Mervyn Kenyon as a guy who's looking good. Any other corners or safeties that stood out to you?
Not really off the top of my head. It's mostly been Kenyon, Bertram, and Tommy McCormick that have really shown out on that defense.
Okay, with Kenyon, Mervyn Kenyon would be the new name. Of course, he's not exactly a new name, but he's a guy who we reasonably should expect has an expanded role this season compared to last season. And then linebacker room, look, we just know it's going to be different. And based off what you've described, they look the part right now. So no actual concerns there. It's just going to be a different makeup than last season. James, we're about to shift into some basketball stuff, but before we shift, last chance to take the wheel on spring football. Anything else you want to bring up?
I think the only thing I'd say is these practices are open. So if you're in the Moscow area, come and watch these guys and see what's going on in Vandal football.
Okay, James, thanks for helping us with that football update. And second half of the show, guys, is basketball stuff, which we'll get to in a second. But before that, of course, we got to talk about our guys over at Hughes River. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River no return, the Salmon River Canyons, and the Selway. Check out special trips like the one to see the Perced meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes, let HRE handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. And by the way, dudes, that goes for whether you are a business, want a large group, or if you're just a family and you want to just you and a few people go. HRE does them both. Just give them a call. Basketball time, James. We have some potential news. I'm not going to call this breaking news precisely, but we've got some news on one assistant coach that we expect to be joining Alex Pribble in Moscow. Our research here is, look, we got a tip, then we started looking. And I got to tell you, Matthew Jones, right now the listed director of basketball operations for Seattle U. Either he is just a huge fan of Alex Pribble and is fine promoting the work of a competitor in the West now that Pribble's not at Seattle U anymore, or dude's an assistant coach, very likely taking the Zach Kloss Memorial number 3 assistant coach position. That's the direction I'm going to point you guys to. Is looks like Matthew Jones is going to be joining Alex Pribble. Nothing official has been announced, but little background on Matthew Jones. By the way, Martin's shown it on the screen. I'll jump back, Martin. I saw the mouse freaking out now so that I can hit this. We're going to talk about the first Vandal commit in a second, but Martin is highlighting that Matthew Jones is retweeting Alex Pribble stuff about first signee. If you run through Matt Jones's likes, it's Vandal, Alex Pribble. So we're going to run through Matthew Jones' background with the expectation. Look, nothing formal has been announced, and you guys would have known about this. James would have known about this prior to this recording if he was a #OnlyTubs patron at patreon.com/Tubs of the Club, which one of the benefits is we let inside news that we can. We give that to our patrons. We don't usually try to break news really, but our patrons learn inside stuff and they get updates as we get updates. So if that interests you, patreon.com/Tubs of the Club. So Matt Jones, James, you've been on the shelf. His background is that he's been on director of basketball operations for Seattle U since 2020. He's a younger guy. He'd been a grad assistant prior to being named director of operations under Is Chris Vincent? Is that the dude's name? Martin? Forgive me. I'm going to have to throw to our crack research team real quick. Head coach at Seattle U, Martin, is frantically pulling that up. And I'm, you know what? We don't care who the head coach at Seattle U. Chris Victor. There we go. We don't care who the head coach at Seattle U is. But anyway, he's been had been working under Chris Victor this year. Would have been promoted initially under Jim Hayford prior, but Matt Jones, younger guy. So James, this is the first you've heard, of course, about Matt Jones. Presumably now number 3 assistant. I don't know why a dude would leave Seattle U to be the director of basketball ops at Idaho and get paid less at a not yet established program. So we're going to say, hey, this looks like the number 3 assistant. Your reaction to hearing first coaching name?
Yeah, as you said, I had absolutely no idea what was going on in that assistant coach search at all. No, didn't really didn't have a chance to look at him. So, but you mentioned younger guy. He worked with Coach Pribble. I think that bringing in that connection there, we saw it work for football, and I would imagine it would work here. I'm a big fan of younger coaches, so I think bringing in a younger assistant coach is the move to make.
Yeah, and very likely number 3 assistant. So that still leaves number 2 assistant and associate head coach positions that we don't yet know who's going to be there. What I'll say is if a guy like Matt Jones is the number 3 assistant, where this would be his first official coaching position, because he'd been director of basketball ops prior, that's on the coaching staff, but that's not precisely a coach. It's a position like Jeremy Harden, current still listed as assistant coach right now. He had that at Boise State under Leon Rice prior to becoming head coach at Wenatchee Valley, prior to coming to University of Idaho. But what I'm going to say is if we have a younger guy taking those number 3 assistants, we're probably going to see the next 2 slots be guys who have a little more diverse background than Seattle U, guys who might have head coaching experience elsewhere, guys who are presumably going to be a little bit older to have that experience. So I don't really have another big takeaway here, James, other than if a younger dude's filling here, we're probably going to get more experienced guys for the associate position and the number 2 position. But big question people had is, hey, what's the staff going to look like? Well, best indication is Matt Jones is going to be coming over. So Matt Jones, consider this your official welcome from Tubbs and the Club. Glad to have you coming over. And look, James, we're about to get to Pribble's first commit as well. But before we hit the commits, since you're on here, since you have a student background that a lot of our listeners don't, I want to take the conversation one step back. How has head coach Alex Pribble resonated so far on campus? Like, has it resonated much? What's it been like?
He hasn't. His name is known, I imagine, by students, but just like Coach Eck, people knew who he was. He was, on campus a little bit, in the iSub. The first time I met the guy, he was eating Chick-fil-A. I imagine that Alex Pribble will eventually have that impact. But at the moment, the only people that I've talked to him about are Mark and Jaden. So I imagine come closer to basketball season, more people will know the name Alex Pribble. But at the moment, it's just the University of Idaho campus, really. So.
Yeah, the men's team, look, in the last half decade, there's 25 D1 wins total over those 5 years. So there's been a long time where people have had reason to not pay attention to Vandal basketball. So pretty sure that's going to take some time. We know if the department's ever lets Alex Pribble on our show, that's one way to reach out to the fan base. We'll see when that happens next. But no news so far, guys. But next basketball news is, you brought up, James, that people eventually are gonna learn Alex Pribble's name. Probably more excitement as basketball season approaches, and of course, it'll be the new school season. Football will be going on, so that fall on campus is an exciting time, generally speaking. At least that's my old man recollection. But Pribble's been putting in work, man. He's got a ton of offers out, and Pribble's got his first commit so far. So there had been 5 scholarship spots open. Presumably now that number goes down to 1. The number 5 comes from 4 graduating seniors plus use of Solly transferring away. First commit that Alex Pribble lands is EJ Neal from Community College of San Francisco. Dude, don't know if you have much background on him, James, but look, in Pribble's press conference, he said he's gonna recruit shooters. He expects to never have fewer than 4 shooters on the floor. He also brought up that Idaho's got to be stronger defensively, and I'm going to say, well, first, sorry, now my thought process got destroyed by Mark Trivelpiece in the comment section. He sent tweets from the club, so he connected with the alumni that way. Mark, you're absolutely correct. But anyway, shifting back, Pribble wants shooters. He wants guys who can play defense. That is the general template I have been told regarding EJ Neal. EJ Neal right now, he projects as kind of a 3-and-D kind of player. Shot 41% from 3 at Community College of San Francisco, averaged 11 points a game. His 3 volume, as in like the number of threes per game he was taking, was not a gigantic number. Shot 2.6 a game last season. So, about 2.5. That's around the number like Nigel Burris shot for Idaho this last season, but hit 41%. And look, he's 6'5", looks like he has the athlete. He essentially is going to fit the mold of a 3-and-D player. So, James, with that as background, any reaction to first Pribble signee EJ Neal?
Yeah, I think this is a great signing. Especially what I looked at was that approximately 1 steal per game and about just over half a block. The other number that stood out to me was the fact that CCSF had him playing 4.4 minutes per game. If you look back through like his game stats, a lot of them are listed as 1 minute, but he had a bunch of points. So I don't know exactly how many points per game or how many minutes per game he was getting, which was very confusing to me. But
can I jump in really quick?
Please do.
100% sure that's a typo.
Yeah.
Like, gonna run through stats really quick, just so, because look, viewers might be able to see this. Listeners obviously can't. What James is talking about is the CCSF Athletics homepage. The stats they have for EJ Neal list him as playing 4 minutes a game, but he was taking 7 shots per game and 2.6 threes per game, averaging 11 points. So either he was scoring freakishly and the coaches just refused to play him, or he was playing more than 4.4 minutes per game. I'm going to assume it's the latter.
Yeah, I agree. I just thought it was kind of funny that I don't even know what the typo there could be because the guy's not playing 44 minutes a game. But definitely a fun little stat there for those who don't want to do the math of minutes compared to games if the numbers were correct. But definitely, as you said, a 3-and-D guy, which I very much so enjoy. It's a kid that played back home that's going to Carroll College, is one of the best mid-range and D players I've ever seen. So getting that 3-point shot and that defense is something that Idaho desperately needed for the last 5 years.
Yeah, he's got some size on the wing. He's definitely playing on the wing. My understanding is, based off some research we did, you would not call EJ Neal a shot creator. He gets his points mostly in catch and shoot kind of situations, which is fine. Like Idaho would have killed for a 6'5" defender who could make threes last season. So fits both things that Pribble kind of emphasized in his press conference of getting shooters, box checked. And if Idaho is going to be able to play disruptive defense, like Pribble referenced both in his press conference and his interview with Johnny Ballgame, look, there's no way around it. Idaho's going to have to get guys who can actually do that. And look, whatever number of dudes return from last season into this coming season, there's no single player who's on the table to return James from last year that I'd say, well, that's our lockdown defender. Those guys are probably going to have to be recruited by Pribble. So this is a guy who we're not saying for sure that's what he's going to be, but EJ Neal's got size. He's got athleticism. He can shoot, checks a few boxes. So now we get to see, who at this point Pribble has 4 scholarships left to sign. We're seeing Idaho giving out a ton of offers. which is great news because during Klaus's interim season, there were no offers that were reported. There were no guys signed, which is like the least shocking thing in the world when a guy comes in as a lame duck. We knew this was going to happen, that Pribble was going to have to move fast. He's doing that, so it looks like the roster is slowly coming together. Still no news yet on the two biggest roster questions from last season, which is Isaac Jones coming back and will Nigel Burris be coming back? At this point, neither has entered the portal, so until they're in the portal, they're Vandals. But those are kind of two guys where it's a big wait and see from our end. James, any roster discussion you want to go over? Now we've got basketball as a topic.
Yeah, just before I hopped on, I saw a scout, another recruit for CCFF or CCSF, Tajon Sawyer, I think his name is, who could come over with EJ Neal. He was averaging over 2 assists a game. Took 23 steals, had 19 blocks, averaged 15 points per game. Another typo, I imagine. I don't think anybody's scoring 15 points per game in 4.5 minutes.
So let me pause it there. Hey, the jury's in. There's some numbers from Community College of San Francisco we can trust. Minutes per game is not one of them.
Yeah. But that's what I had written down. But yeah, the fact that those two players combined were averaging around 6 assists, I think is going to be big for Idaho, and especially that defense. Just under probably a steal a game for Sawyer, and about a steal a game for Neal. So definitely could be another interesting defensive addition out of CCSF.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to hit on Sawyer in a second, but this would be, if let's pretend Sawyer was signed, he's been offered. Nigel Burris is from the San Francisco area. We just went over that EJ Neal would be coming over from San Francisco. If, since you brought up the individual offer to Tajon Sawyer, if you were to come over, that'd be a third dude from the San Francisco area. Sawyer he'd be kind of an interesting ad for Idaho. He's 6'8". He absolutely can shoot. He would be a stretch 4/stretch 5 in the Big Sky, dude. Absolutely has a good jump shot in catch and shoot. His athleticism is kind of more analogous to like a really nimble offensive lineman, in that the guy is relatively quick for his position, but he's not a great vertical athlete. But look, Idaho needs depth in the post as well. That wasn't something Pribble emphasized, but last season, Idaho for the majority of the season essentially had 2 playable posts. And look, we know for a fact that we know Pribble's gonna definitely get some guys to buttress that depth. And in addition, James, you're going to be able to help me here. Vandal player who had the horrific ankle injury against Pacific. Taryn Frank, thank you. That's James is now part of our crack research team. Taryn Frank going down hurt the depth for Idaho in the post. Taryn Frank has already said he's going to be back for this year. He wants to stay a Vandal, wants to at least experience a year with Alex Pribble. But even if Frank is back, and even if Jones and Burris are back, that's essentially 3 total playable posts. Most coaches have about 8-ish guys that are playing, but it certainly would not hurt to have a 4th playable post. So if Sawyer is a guy who signs, you'd say on paper now Idaho has 4, but we're going to see. There's other guys who it'll be interesting to see if they end up signing. But at this point, we've got 1 assistant coach down, nothing confirmed by the university, but I'm 0% concerned about being wrong here. We've got 1 guy signed, so we've got some basketball news. James, we have one more segment that I need to get to that I purposely did not tell you about, because this is your first time on Tubbs. We've covered basketball, we've covered football. Whenever we have guests on, we have a segment we call a reversal, which is with no notice. We pivot to our new guest and say, hey, you get to ask a question to the team. Martin, you'll be yanked in to answer this one too. But it's the reversal. You've got no notice. Any questions, throw the Tubbs team any question you have. It can be about Tubbs. It can be about sports. It can be about anything. This is this is your time again to have the wheel.
Okay. I was trying to churn out questions in my head there. I think I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball here and ask you about a sport I imagine you don't cover much, and that is men's tennis. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Idaho is on a 5-game win streak. They have 3 more home games down in Lewiston. They're the 2022 reigning Big Sky champions. What do you guys think about Idaho men's tennis?
I'll go first. Like I don't know much. I don't try to pretend like I know a whole lot about it. But I mean, it's cool to see another team outside of the big 3, let's say, having success. Is what I'll just kind of go off and go. That's what I'll say.
So full disclosure, I have not watched a gigantic amount of men's tennis. I am a retired tennis player. My younger brother played college tennis as well, so I am from what you call a tennis family. And look, the clips I've seen, of course, are fun. I'm gonna, echo what Martin said. Anytime a Vandal team is good, like we're happy for a turnaround if a turnaround's needed, or we're happy for continued success if that's the case. I do like that, the coaches from, especially the football coaches, because I mean, our basketball coaches have essentially been radio silence for the last half decade, because why wouldn't they? But the football coaches have done a pretty good job about trying to pump up other sports as well, that's part of how I've seen some tennis clips. So yeah, dude, of course look, when we hear that like the women's soccer team is doing well, we're stoked. If we ever get to hear about the volleyball team doing well, phase 1, the volleyball team needs an actual roster. But once the volleyball team has a roster, they turn that around. That's of course good news. We're probably not going to do a lot of in-depth tennis breakdowns. If Idaho ever has a sanctioned pickleball team, that may become a new segment that we can spend hours and hours dissecting. But my broad, very, very hot takeaway, James, is that's good.
I agree. Martin, I'm going to ask one more here because it's what I thought of. Martin, you're the women's basketball guy. We have Beyonce coming back next season, and most of the team is still here. Madison Rubino, the only one really entering the portal that I've seen. There's 2. Okay.
One's not in the portal. The other, I think, went pro. Brooke Malone went. I'd looked, according to a post, looked like she went pro in Australia. So that's kind of the other something that I saw. But I'm not so 100% positive on that one.
That's not what I was going to ask, but I'll take it. Yeah, just kind of, now that we've gone through another Idaho women's basketball season where they hit stride at the end and struggled at the beginning. Just kind of your thoughts going forward on, after the Beyonce era is over, kind of what Idaho women's basketball should do.
I don't know. It's kind of the generic. It's kind of a cop-out answer. Maybe it is time to go in a new direction. I don't want to. I love John Newley. I had the best 2 weeks of my life traveling with that team. So I don't really want to. I don't really have much else to say. I mean, it'll definitely be a weird if and when that happens. But they got through the Splash Sisters just fine, so I think they'll be just fine either way after Beyonce and whatever comes next.
Yeah, well, look, Martin, the point you bring up, and I know what you're in a different way. What you're saying is Idaho basketball has not been like terrible the last few years, the way like the men's was the most embarrassing dumpster fire it possibly could have been the last half decade. But you're saying, look, relative to how Newley's career had been, especially, in the or around like the 2010, the
2010s.
I would use 2010 as the barometer. These last few seasons have been relative, or at least the last 2 years have been relative steps down. So it is now becoming a question. Look, no one thinks a John Newley team is going to be a catastrophe like the other side had been for a half decade, but we are in a little bit of a downward trajectory, and like the next question for the women's team is how or can they get back to the trajectory we'd had earlier in Newly's career, where like they're making the NCAA tournament, or like they're making postseason tournaments, they're finishing in the top 2 or 3 in conference. And James, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that I think this is probably a pretty important year for Newly, as far as at least getting the program. I'm not saying it doesn't need a complete overhaul like the men's team does, but you couldn't watch last year's team and not tell that, especially like size rebounding just wasn't good enough to be a good Big Sky team, and that's with beyond the roster. So how they take what their next developmental step would be, that's essentially going to be the storyline of next year's women's basketball.
Yeah, for sure. I am a big women's basketball fan. Very excited to see what Iowa and South Carolina put on. But I agree, especially with that rebounding point for both men and women's basketball. I think that is an area that both teams heavily need to increase.
Well, yeah, because look, we're very close to closing out, guys. But James, just because you're bringing it up, I think we can kind of talk about men's and women's simultaneously here. Idaho has kick-ass facilities now, best basketball facilities in the Big Sky, and look, the men's team, I can tell you my answer why, but the women's team also, you'd say they haven't yet capitalized on the theoretical potential of having the best facilities in the conference. And it does feel like there's some energy there for both men and women that has not yet been capitalized. And especially I want to point to the Eastern game, where that was the only game all season, men's or women's, that Idaho pulled out in the top rafters. And look, ICCU is a kick-ass environment with those rafters closed and about 2,000 fans there. But like, we can be honest here. If you only have to pull out the rafters one game the entire year, it means your attendance is pretty shitty relative to what you'd think something like that should be. So like the novelty of the arena itself is clearly, a couple years in, the jury's in. The novelty of the arena was not enough to fill the arena. For the men's team, we need to not be catastrophically terrible, which it feels like look, we're moving in the right direction, in a new direction. That's what we needed to for the men. For the women, look, women's attendance in all sports is always, it's almost universally diminished relative to men's, unless you're in a place like, South Carolina or like UConn, where it's, historically good programs. But, the women probably have some energy that they could capitalize on as well, that the arena itself has not. The arena itself isn't going to fill the seats. It's got to be good teams. And the men have way more ground to make up, which again, looks like they move in the right direction. But the women also have a step or two they need to make so that we can say, hey, the attendance here is being maximized because we've got solid teams playing in a kick-ass place.
For sure.
Well, that, guys, we can probably call it a night. Next week, Trevin Pixley should be joining us. We have another guy who's going to practices to help us learn more about spring football. As we have news with basketball, we'll of course bring that up. But until then, we're going to sign off. James, thanks for coming. Tell everyone where they can find you online.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at JamesAldrich25 or on the Argonaut website if you want to read fun stuff.
And the Scoreboard podcast, right? Available on Spotify. Is that available on iTunes, all podcast carriers?
That's a great question. I know for sure Spotify. And we have an episode coming out Saturday. Should be at 11 a.m. Talking about practice and Pribble and something else. So,
does that mean when you say something else, it's not yet been recorded?
It has been recorded. I just don't remember what the third P was that we said for the title.
Okay. We will not hold that against James, the pride of Lewistown, Montana, Aldrich. Thanks for coming on, dude. We're going to sign off. Martin is rotating through pictures in the background if you're a viewer. Hey, comment section. It's been pretty active. Forgive us for being shitty about getting to the comment section. There is always next week, but as always with our live viewers, man, part of the fun of doing a live show is a comment thread. Thanks for everyone joining in. We're going to sign off. See you guys next week. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.